Okay, so welcome to this session on adapting your SDE facility to support PDA and preparing to sign up a new PDA student. So first of all, there are a couple of trigger warnings. I am going to be using disability language. I'm going to be doing this from a disability focus. A lot of my work isn't that, which is why I'm also saying that, because I do have a lot of love and respect for PDA, and I think it's amazing, and I don't think the world would be at least as good a place without it. But my focus here is not on supporting PDA itself, but on supporting people who are not PDAers in supporting PDAers, specifically in self-directed education. And for these purposes, we'll have a look at why I'm going to be using that very strongly emphasized focus on disability today. I'm also going to be focusing mostly on explosive PDA, because that is usually what incentivizes facilities to first start considering how to support PDA. And if you are being supportive for explosive PDA, those same supports will be useful for more internalized PDA as well. So there again, the explosive PDAs are doing everybody a favor by helping everybody really get the immediate feedback that's necessary to tell when things are going right. So that said, I just need to figure out quite how to run all my tech here. There we go. So PDA is a very real disability in almost every setting worldwide today. And I'd like to start the call by briefly looking at 3 different models of disability, of understanding what disability is. So there's the medical, the social, and the moral. So the medical model is mostly sort of respected as useful, but it has its limitations, especially in terms of dealing with real human beings rather than disorders or diseases or problems. The social model is increasingly recognized as transformative and really useful for all forms of disability. The moral model of disability is kind of the old-fashioned one, where people used to look upon it, I'll go into more detail in a minute, but as a deficit that's stigmatized. And this is considered to be cruel and ignorant and mostly obsolete. Very important to note this for what I'm going to say in a minute. So the medical model of disability is pretty much saying, look, here's the problem. It's over here, it's in the person in some way, and the solution, for example, for being paraplegic would be, let's see if we can fix your legs, very briefly. The social model of disability is, and this is my definition, it's a disempowering interactive effect between a person's ability and their environment. So because of the way that the environment interacts with the person's ability, they then become disempowered or disabled. And the sorts of examples of everyday solutions for being paraplegic would be, let's build more ramps. So what comes to mind is the saying, don't control the child, control the environment, would be sort of a reference we'd use for that model as well. Then the moral model of disability, I took a quote here from a study that was done not too long ago, where one participant said, "When I was young, it was common to hide people with disabilities because it's disgraced. It is a sign of evil. Families don't want people to see them as evil." Now there's a belief in our more sort of westernized spaces that this is a kind of pre-industrial belief that disability is a sign of some moral lack. God has struck you down, or you are not good enough, you should fix yourself or be outcast. But these 3 models all get applied to PDA right here, right now. Now the medical model, I haven't been quite fair yet. I've said this currently in denial because it has no solutions, which is maybe a little extreme to say, and there are some therapeutic approaches, not medical as such, not medication as such, that are being explored for PDA, and in some cases some sort of parallel or sort of comorbid issues have been dealt with medication. Some kids respond well, for example, to anxiety medication or ADHD medication, but it's there's nothing that's actually been found to work for PDA. And what we've got at the moment is we've got a lot of argument in the medical and therapeutic and psychiatric community around whether PDA is a valid diagnosis, and if so, what that diagnosis consists of, and people arguing that it's just trauma, and people saying this and that and the other. So that model's not particularly helpful for PDA right now. Then the social model applied to PDA actually works great. The more that we adapt the environment and the way that we interact with the PDA child, the more things actually start to happen. Now, I am biased when I look at, the contrast between the medical approach and the social approach, also because I'm a self-directed education facilitator. So my focus is in all ways with all kids, not about kind of therapeutically changing the child through my intervention. My focus is always on how do we actually support and supply the conditions and the nourishment that the child can actually grow and learn and develop for themselves in their own way and their own time. And that's where I find SDE not only very useful for the child's conventionally understood educational purposes, but also when we really accommodate PDA, the kids are very creative and capable and are then able to work on their own ways of supporting themselves, reaching out for support, deciding what support they need. And I think that it's a wonderful way to support PDA to really focus on the social model of disability. Unfortunately, right now in our world, the most popular is the moral model of disability for PDA. It is the norm out there to blame the parents, for example, and tell them they've got to go on parenting courses. Subtext in the trauma kind of model that some of the medical community is pursuing is that something happened that the parents are denying, blaming the child, trying to use punitive discipline to force the child to be different. That is actually still sadly the norm, and it's very insidious because just like we're aware that the moral model is always based on ignorance. Now, we can't be judgmental about that ignorance because it is also just at this point in history very new to be able to understand what PDA is all about, and we'll go there in a minute. The point is that PDA is a very real disability in almost every setting in today's world. But the social model of disability can guide us to be able to make a very big, real difference. The problem is that PDA is not just autism plus anxiety. And this has kind of become a bit of a bugbear for me because this is the problem that I've had when trying to explain PDA, for example, to therapists, is that I've had a number of therapists tell me, oh yeah, no, sure, we can do therapy for PDA. I've had experience with autism, with anxiety, I can do PDA. And then, of course, you find out that that just backfires so horribly because that's really not what it is. Trauma-informed support is helpful, but it's also not enough. PDA needs to be correctly understood in order for us to effectively support the PDA child, and our support strategies need to be PDA specific. What works for autism and anxiety or trauma? Oops! Whose fault is this? the person who tries to cross on their wheelchair, because too often in our facilities the PDA child will be blamed. Or the person who thought they knew how to build the bridge or the ramp, but again, this is so new, how can we be sure we know what we're doing? Or did the earth just move and that's just how it is? Does it matter who's to blame? Or can we learn more about building ramps? And that's also where, if you work with me, you know that my approach is horizontal communication and multi-partiality, where we don't try to figure out who did what wrong. We try and figure out how to solve the problem and make life more wonderful. So PDA is very new in terms of recognition, and most of us have zero clue what it is or how to support PDAers. The world around us pushes the moral model for PDA, and even once we step away from that model, it can be hard to know what to actually do. Honestly, we're still busy inventing the ramp technology. We're still inventing how to really support PDA, but we do already know enough to be able to really make a big difference. But before we look at how to make that difference, let's look at the facts. You don't have to. Not every alternative education space can afford wheelchair ramps. Not every education space can afford to accommodate PDA. And there are times when it's better to say no, sorry, rather than to say yes and not actually do it. Because claiming to support PDA and then letting the PDA crash and burn gives them yet another failure experience. And that reinforces the moral interpretation of disability. In their own eyes, they have failed. And in the eyes of community, look, we tried, but you weren't good enough. Just ask the parents, if you're a facilitator, just hear the story again and again from parents, whether they're aware that that's what happened or not. People saying they can support PDA, and then this lovely collapse over here takes place. So the best thing of all, though, is to say, yes, let's give it a go, without making promises, and then truly give it a go. And my plea to anyone watching this video, afterwards, not only the people who are on the call right now, if you're watching this video, come and join the server. If you're in the server, stay in the server. Come to support calls. If you can pay me, I'm very happy. It is my form of income. It pays for my family's needs, but I would rather have you come in the server and get support and build the ramps that don't collapse for PDA, because we need that in the world. Right. So this call on its own is not going to be enough. This call on its own is going to help somewhat. Right. So let's first look at why you might want to take the trouble. So the first reason that I love is because of social justice. Alternative education is lovely for any child, but an actual necessity for most PDAers. And for SDE settings to fail to accommodate PDA, I like to use an analogy. It's like leaving a steep flight of steps as the only access to a physiotherapy room. Next reason, innovation. PDA models and inspires innovation like nothing I've seen in any other neurotype. ADHD is very inventive, and PDA's usually got that same kind of level of novelty preference and innovation. And I seriously doubt whether humanity would have developed either fashion or cuisine without PDA in the gene pool. And you will find your space finding new ways to do things you would not have thought of otherwise if you bring PDAs into your community. And it goes on. So what was mentioned during the check-in is that I often say that including PDAs in an SDE community helps us get to gold standard, because they are like a canary in a coal mine. So if people aren't familiar with that analogy, the miners in the UK used to literally take a little canary in a cage down in the coal mine with them, and if there was a gas leak, the canary was so sensitive to that the canary would fall over, and then the miners wouldn't have smelt it, wouldn't have felt a headache yet, but they'd go, uh-oh, and they'd get out of there before they had any problem. And the same is true for PDAs in a self-directed education setting. We might think that our environment is completely like, oh, so egalitarian, non-coercive, all the rest. Your PDA will act like a litmus test. You'll be able to see exactly where your processes are problematic or disempowering very, very quickly. Where other kids might be sucking it up or keeping quiet about it or not even really conscious that there's a problem. Your PDA is going to let you know. Okay. Then, once you've adapted for PDA, then you have actually already adapted for trauma pretty much, shy kids and many other kids, because safety is safety, empathy is empathy, care is care, and everybody benefits. So it really makes the whole space a different kind of space, in much the same way as a society becomes a different society when children are put in the center, or when any kind of marginalization is actively prioritized to support. The benefits are in the end for everybody. Another beautiful benefit of taking the trouble to accommodate PDA is personal growth, mindfulness, communication and social skills for everybody in the mix. And a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek but accurate analogy is PDAs can be like social sandpaper. So they can be abrasive and cause discomfort, but mostly for those of us who have rough edges, and who doesn't. We've all got rough edges, and particularly those of us who need more patience, those of us who need to be more open-minded, those of us who need a bit more honesty, those of us who need more empathy, and those of us who need to just chill. It can be uncomfortable, but very, very, very useful. And yeah, I and a number of other people who've spoken to me and who I've heard and read and of various ages, many ages, kids, grown-ups, who at first resented or resisted accommodating PDA later realize how grateful they are to have had this opportunity and how much it has liberated them and helped them grow. And it's not even finished. Most PDA kids are generous, kind, excellent leaders, don't tolerate injustice, stand up against oppression of others, love animals and little kids, love being helpful and taking responsibility, are exceptionally creative, energetic and dynamic, have an awesome sense of humor, an ability to see through the BS like you can't believe, which is also what gets uncomfortable, but it's useful, and a wisdom beyond their years. So why would you not want to meet that person? Why would you not want them in your community? But the only way to meet and experience that true version of the person is to learn how to not sabotage that person, so that what you see isn't that, but the fight, flight, freeze states that are being triggered. So the difference between this and this is your support. Okay, so then assuming that we want to be doing this, how do we do this? First step, we need to educate ourselves and do that with humility. Humility being knowing that I know, then knowing that I don't know. That whole idea of having the empty cup and the open mind. We need to start from a place of realizing that PDA is a totally different thing. It is its own thing, pretty much unlike anything else. And that a gold standard of attachment parenting is not going to be enough. Perfect nonviolent communication, not going to be enough. Trauma-informed care, not going to be enough. Autism with anxiety support, no. It's its own thing. Then the next thing is that it's not just about learning about PDA in the abstract. We need to learn and adapt on the job, because every PDA is more than their PDA. They're a unique person with their unique profile, their own needs, their own strengths, their own skills, their own circumstances, and other needs. So when we are looking at taking in a particular student, it's not enough to have educated ourselves about PDA. We also need to research who is coming in. Ask the parents, listen, and possibly other people too, and believe what you hear. And at the same time as believing what you hear, we need to know that interaction makes a very big difference. We might hear nightmare stories from another educational facility, in which case the first thing to assess is how much did they know about supporting PDA, because the picture can look very different in your space. Then we need to assess our own capacity. And this is also important. How many PDAs of what age do we already have? And how many kids who are likely to clash with PDA? Kids who are very assertive, very controlling, very rigid. Are they likely to be overlapping? How will they mix? And then we need to maybe decide on the yes, the no, the maybe. So if we can say for sure, hey, this kid is this age and these kids are going to beeline for them, and the parent has told us that their main interest is in this area and they're going to be using the same room, this sounds like it's not very likely to work out. We might then even be able to predict enough that we say, no, our capacity is maxed. We've only got one chairlift and we've got 15 stories and we've already got 5 people using the chairlift. Sorry for that analogy again, but we need to be realistic what we can accommodate. On the other hand, it's usually going to be a maybe, because you don't really know, right? Until you try it out and see. You can only guess until you experiment. And sometimes it's going to be, no, that sounds good. We feel like we know what we're doing. It looks like this kid's the right age and got the right interests to just fit in perfectly. But even then, it's an initial yes. It's important to manage the expectations of the parent and the child. And we'll go into that more in a minute. But there needs to be a decision on how to meet. We're not going to just say, okay, great, we're signing up your kid for our facility. Here they come, pay your term in advance. In they come, yes. It needs to be initial, and we need to look at how we're going to meet and assess further. So we want some kind of a contained situation that allows a limited expectation so that we can explore. And it's important to decide this together with the parent, because they know what their circumstances are, they know how their kid functions, etc. So it might be a visiting week, for example, which is common in most Sudbury schools, to come for a week and see how it goes. It might actually be necessary to make it something even more limited, to limit the child's expectations, if it's possible, to just bring them to an open day or to a special event or to a holiday program, so that can be a contained experience without setting up that promise, that hope of a permanent community. Because the more likely it is that maybe could turn to a no, according to your initial explorations, the more tightly those expectations should be controlled to prevent trauma from another failure in the face of high hopes. So the PDA kid really, really wants a place to come to. They've got a very high desire that this works out. If you are not managing that expectation to some degree, and you know that it's not likely to work out from what explorations you've done, then you're really setting them up for another sort of hurt, which they really don't need in their lives, right? So it's important to express the desire to support effectively, but not the impossible certainty that you can. And this is also where I just face palm when I hear about these spaces saying, yeah, sure, we can accommodate PDA, come on in. Because that's really not something that anybody can actually do or promise. Right. So next, now you've decided that we're going to go ahead and have a try. You're going to orient your community. Definitely all staff, all key staff need to know that there's a PDA coming in and what that means. Possibly orient some of the kids. This would especially be kids that you know will get it and who'll be helpful. and are generally likely to be supportive and useful. You might choose to not tell any kids. If you do tell kids, unless they already know what PDA is and have previous experience, you may want to avoid using labeling and disability language at first, so that they can more engage with the kid on a kid-to-kid basis, without sort of having that lens. But you could heads up them that this person might need more support. And possibly some of the parents, depending again on the parents, their experience, how likely it is that their kids are going to be interacting with those kids, etc. But this first round, just the people that you need to orient in order to make your initial experiment and assessment. And then you need to prepare yourself for a cycle that's going to keep going the whole time. So we're going to start by accommodating as much as we are capable of accommodating. We're going to see what the result of that is. We're going to review what the result of that is. Then we're going to look at, do we need to consult and find out more information, orient or educate ourselves more, train more people, educate and orient other people in the community. What do we need to do at that planning stage for the next round of, let's try this accommodation, see how that experience pans out, review it, and plan the next. Now, why I say this keeps going for the whole time that you're supporting the PDA is because things shift with PDA. It's unlike, very, very unlike building a ramp, in that when you build a ramp, you build a ramp. And you maybe have to maintain that ramp in the same way to keep it like that, and probably not for a while. Whereas with PDA, again, there's this high novelty preference. Routines can quickly start to feel like demands. So it's really very agile. You need to be very agile and ready for continuing this process. And of course it gets easier, because you get more used to doing it, and the relationships are stronger, and the PDA also, as they get well accommodated, is going to become more and more participatory in making things work. Okay. So this is a point in time to just notice that we are working with both the PDA and the environment of the community, not just the PDA. And we start with working with the environment and community. Then we see how well that works before we know if or what we need to ask the PDA or their parents to work on with them. So therapeutic work with only the PDA is sort of there in the medical model. And people sometimes get confused about this, because when we choose the social model, the environment is the main adaptation that we're going to make. And I've noticed, again, quite a few settings think they're adapting or accommodating, when in fact what they're trying to do is find ways to get the PDA to not have PDA anymore. I mean, not going to happen. So adaptation and accommodation means that we are changing what we do. So let's continue with this, working with the social environment and community. You might find as you go around that cycle that disability, language, and labeling are necessary with all the kids and all the parents, that you have to sit everybody down and go, okay, this is PDA, this is what it is a disability, we need to be fair, and if so, discuss with the PDA parent, and then do what it takes to get a good level of understanding so that it doesn't just become a label, but it becomes an insight and a compassion. Where people are not very compatible with the social model, then the medical model can be used to help people understand. I find the whole fight, flight, freeze neurology thing helps a lot in helping people understand what's going on. But the moral model must be uprooted thoroughly, again, because the world is presenting that all the time, and that message keeps coming from everybody around us. So the people that you're talking to in your setting are going home and their neighbors are going, that sounds crazy, that's just a brat. So we really need to get that moral model uprooted. We need to notice and be aware which of our kids and staff and parents are coping well and which of them need more support on how to engage or encouragement to disengage, because not everybody has to support the PDA. You can support them or you can keep out their way, right? This is also an option. Please feel free to share my resources with anybody on PDA and SDE for PDA. Obviously, if you've been in private calls where people have been recorded and spoken, you need to respect their privacy and not share those bits. But you know, most of what you would be needing or wanting to share would be things like this. Please share those. There's also some really great resources online for understanding PDA, and I highly recommend Sally Catt. She's very creative. She's a PDA. She's incredible. Beautiful example of the creativity and wisdom that can come with PDA. And yeah, you can just look her up. Easy to find, getting easier to find by the day, which is great. The algorithms know all about her now. And then another page of working with the social environment or community is to evoke empathy for the PDA. Again, so that people understand this is a person, they're struggling in this way because of this. So that there's really a sense of empathy for them rather than just kind of looking at them as a set of behaviors from the outside. At the same time, it's really important to use that disability language, if you're using it, with an equity spin, not a pity spin, because this is about solidarity, not charity. It's about my needs are accommodated, their needs can be accommodated. We happen to have different needs, right? But this is about being fair in the deepest sense. We need to affirm the effort and achievement of everyone. When somebody's managed to be supportive or have a great interaction, we need to acknowledge that people can also feel themselves, become aware of themselves becoming more competent in relating with the PDA. We need to affirm that it's not simple for anyone. It's very challenging. It's quite an achievement. And we also need to make sure everyone knows how to get support or call for help when they're not managing. Also calling for help for the PDA when they're not managing. So one of the things we say is, if you see signs of stress and you don't need help, know that those signs of stress mean that the PDA needs help. So call for help for them and we will come and help them. We need to model positive embracing and appreciation for everybody concerned, including the PDA. And when it happens, we need to call out ableism and challenge ignorance and moral attack. Now, obviously, we want to do this in the most horizontal, kindest, empathic, non-judgmental way we can, but it's important not to let it take root. Again, because it's coming from everywhere else, it's really easy for it to take root and be strengthened if we don't actually do something about it. And then we do come to working with the PDA as well. So firstly, we need to figure out what are our bottom lines and how to protect those. So if we're going to look, for example, at violence, different spaces have got different definitions of what violence is. Play fighting, when people get hurt in play fighting, does there need to be blood before there's a problem? Does there need to be crying before there's a problem? Does violence begin with just touching somebody without consent lightly? But each community needs to figure out what their bottom lines are and how are those going to be protected. And then together with your bottom lines, what are your preferences? It's not a bottom line. Some Sudbury schools are full of people swearing everywhere, like troopers. Some Sudbury school communities, it's completely not acceptable. if you had a preference for the PDA not to be swearing, but it's not really a bottom line, it's a preference, or for example tidying up after yourself, definitely preferred, but is it really a bottom line? This is the stuff that you need to figure out within your facility, because then you need to figure out, once you've protected your bottom lines, how do you also try for your preferences, and what do you do when you don't get them? Then below that, what are the demands or expectations or rules or protocols that are in place in your facility right now, because they make it easier to run the place, and this is how we do things here. But we can actually release these as exceptions for the PDA, even if we're going to keep them in place for everybody else, like putting in a ramp and everybody else is still expected to take the stairs. And that's where having used disability language is useful in explaining to the other kids, this is still fair. So-and-so doesn't have to do this because PDA, like so-and-so doesn't have to climb the stairs because wheelchair, right? So how do we do this in collaboration with our community to figure out what we can actually completely let go of as an exception? But then we also need to figure out who is going to pick up that slack, who is going to assist. And we can consider reshaping for everyone in some cases, which is part of the gift, because we also might discover, hey, when we let go of that rule, everybody prefers it without that rule. We actually don't need that rule for anybody. Can often be part of the gift. I think of teacher Tom in his preschool classroom, beautifully modeling about pack up time, where he doesn't force anyone to pack up ever. He just makes it so fun and so collaborative and such a feeling of empowerment and competence to pack up, that the kid who doesn't pack up sort of the other kids don't really feel that they are getting something. They feel like they're losing out on something by not joining in. There's many ways to do these things. Right, and then yes, expect to change details or forms of support as need be, and don't be surprised that things that worked stopped working. It's natural to be a bit disappointed because you had this thing going on and it was working great, and now it suddenly stopped working, but that will happen. That is part of the innovation that the PDA is going to be pushing for you, whether they want it or not, and it can be a good thing. Right, then more working with the PDA. I'm not going in a lot of detail in this call on these things. I'm touching on them as a kind of a checklist that you can go and explore, because there is material on these things elsewhere. So in this call I'm very much focusing on what I haven't really found so much elsewhere, and creating a kind of a framework for you. Some of this you can get more information from me, and some you can get all over the place. So one of those things is about mindful language. This is probably one of the things that's been most written and spoken about in terms of accommodating PDA. And unfortunately a lot of people get the impression that it's all that you have to do is just talk differently, which just isn't it. That's kind of just one part of it. But the way that we use language shapes experience. It shapes how things are experienced and seen for everybody. So with PDA, we want to give information rather than instruction. And this is also where it's so compatible with self-directed education. Instead of telling people what to do, we give them the information that they need in order for them to be able to figure out what to do. Which takes the pressure off, that it's no longer a demand, it's an opportunity. So just one example would be, rather than saying, you need to put the Lego back in the box now, it's like, the Lego is on the floor, and when we leave the room it needs to be in the box. Now, the important thing here again is that we aren't relying on the language to achieve coercion. We are relying on the language to provide an opportunity, because we've already decided in our bottom lines and our preferences that if the PDA doesn't pack up, are we going to nudge them further because that's part of what we're doing and they're managing everything else and that's what we're working on now? Or are we just going to do it? So we're going to have decided that kind of thing in advance. Where viable, let them overhear versus receive information or specifically invitations. In an SDE setting, it's really important that kids are very able to feel that there's no pressure to come and do an activity that's available. So if we're going to go and explicitly say to a PDA, hey, do you want to do pottery? There's, especially if they're coming in new, there's a whole lot of social layering of demand on there, because, you know, it's like, okay, if they're inviting you, you're supposed to want to go, and they'll be happier if you go, and all of this stuff that could interfere with them doing the pottery that they wanted to do. So we want to rather, for example, announce to the room, see that they've heard, but announce to the room, anybody interested, there's pottery happening over there, and then walk away. Same thing can be used for getting your preferred things to happen. Like I will often say to people who are with the PDA, oh, everybody needs to get changed now, or have you guys noticed that there's still paint on the floor? So we also want to, especially when there's conflicts or interpersonal problems, instead of controlling or trying to direct the behavior of the PDA, we want to evoke empathy in the PDA so that there's a natural response. So instead of sort of saying, you're not allowed to hit him, you'd better say sorry and not doing it again. It's like, that really hurt him, and I think his feelings are hurt too, right? Give information that makes it clear why what is a problem for who, because this is not always going to be understood. There's an interpretation of, but I mean, we all have this. We all have our interpretations of the situation and whether it's a problem or not. And for PDA, we might sometimes need to make it very clear why the thing is actually a problem, in what way, for who. But again, without giving them a demand that they take a particular action about it, but just making sure that they've understood the information so that they can then choose how to take action that time or next time. Because what you'll often find is that the demand to do something with that information right now is too high, but you'll find a change in the behavior that it's not getting repeated, which is also where, you know, sort of using that discipline tactic of insisting on a change right now is really not helpful. So there again, where need be, step away and take hands off rather than trying to control. And especially if a PDA is becoming overwhelmed. And I mean, I was asked again the other day, you know, what do we do if there's other kids around and we see that things are becoming problematic? Take the other kids away rather than trying to take the PDA away. Then building spoons. If you don't know what spoons are, that's one of the things you can go find out. It's a really nice analogy. It's basically resources or resilience or coping capacity. Let's look at how we can actively offer ways to meet needs for autonomy, for competence, and for relatedness. Again, this ties in with my work on motivation, which is also something you can go and have a look at. So with all of these things, what you can do is you can go catch up on these other topics and then come back again to review this call now that you've got those pieces in place. But the more that we meet anybody's needs for autonomy and competence and relatedness, the more we're building that person's nourishment. Again, not manipulative, not fake, but genuine. Ask for help from the PDA for something they're good at, but I mean, again, ask for it by letting them know you need the help rather than asking them to help you. Give them the opportunity to do so autonomously. That'll build their sense of competence and their sense of relatedness. Then, apart from building that nourishment, What are recovery options? Because even when your PDA is doing well, it's going to cost them, right? Navigating such a complex environment is in itself going to be tiring and run the spoons down. Where can your PDA retreat to? You need to have places your PDA can retreat, ways your PDA can retreat, calming options that are available. Again, you're going to have set up some of these with parents in advance. It's often digital devices. A setting that does not allow a PDA to access a digital device better have some really great other ideas on hand. And again, if you don't have easy access to digital devices for the rest of your community, you might have to put that in place as an accommodation for your PDA, specifically because PDA, right? There will be a change in location if your PDA has a specific spot to retreat to. Make it possible for that to change over time as it needs to. Then empowerment and voice. It might be difficult for your PDA to speak up in meeting, for example, or JCE, for example, or just to ask for stuff or give ideas. How are you going to make sure that they can? You'll need to think of different ways that people will be able to participate, which again can help your whole community, because it's not only PDAs who often have a problem advocating for themselves. But with PDA, I think it's easy to forget that there might be a problem for advocating for oneself, because especially with explosive PDA, it might seem as if they are very insistent on their own needs. But that's not necessarily about being able to voice their own needs. It might just be an expression of stress. So not to confuse the two, and to make sure that we are making sure that their needs can be discovered. Even if it is about, again, making exceptions and making a stronger partnership with parents than one might always have with other students to find out what's coming out at home. Like with all of the kids, we need to actively build safe relationships, and with every PDA I've ever met, support animals are great where viable. Again, without pressure, but just to have available in the environment. If need be, in terms of making it possible for the PDA and your community to coexist in a sustainable, wonderful way, you might also need to temporarily consider exceptions such as a dedicated trained assistant for the child, trained in self-directed education for PDA, so that they fit in with the rest of the setting and they're able to just smooth things over, keep an eye. They probably need to not follow the child around too, obviously, or the child might accept them as a personal partner. But somebody who is able to drop everything else whenever necessary, however often is necessary, might be needed during that bridging phase when your community and your PDA are both getting enough capacity to be able to cope without that. The other thing that you could consider, if necessary, is to allow for part-time, even if you don't usually do part-time. It's not unusual in the families that are in this current community for their kids to go less days in the week or less hours in a day. But it would be best, if possible, to be flexible and offer that family flexibility on which days or which hours. Because again, a routine in itself can become a demand, whereas if the PDA can follow their flow and say, I'd like to go in now, or I don't want to go in this time, but I do want to go in later, that can be accommodated as much as possible. And then when there are problems, considering resolving things differently to the way that you do with the rest of the community, possibly sometimes with active help from parents, whereas, for example, in most Sudbury spaces, you're not going to have that. It's like very often what happens here stays here, is solved here. you might need to make an exception for PDA, but really only if the parents understand PDA, please, and the parents are not going to judge the child. If the parents are true allies for the child, then that can be a useful thing to do. And then sometimes one-on-one communication, instead of many of the mechanisms might involve sitting in a group, like a JC or an access committee, sitting in a group and solving things together. I call it a one-on-one communication relay. I might need to go over here to talk to that person over there, to talk to this person over there, to talk to the PDA, and then, kind of circuit around. And proxy messages, including apologies. You'll often get a situation where the PDA is clearly, would like to, for example, apologize or make someone feel better, but they can't because there's too much pressure on it. In which case, offering to deliver that message as a proxy can be very satisfying outcome for everybody, because then the other people get that and the PDA gets to feel that it's been done, and can work very well. So we are nearly at the end. I've also been incorporating all along the way things that parents and facilitators have commented in the private PDA groups, and I'm going to just wrap up with a few more of the insights from there as well. Remember that not all PDA is explosive. Again, we focus mostly on explosive PDA because that's what causes everybody else a problem, and so it gets noticed. But there are kids with PDA who are very much implosive, and we need to try and be aware of that. Then there's also an important difference between coping and masking or fawning. Seeming to cope because they're just trying so hard to fit in, but in the meantime it's really, really costing them, and they're not necessarily learning or taking in what else is going on. And overly therapeutic approaches can compound this, to just be aware of that. Real coping will expand as safety increases in the space, whereas masking will gradually dissolve as safety increases, and that's one of the ways you can also tell which it was. Masking can gradually be replaced with coping if everything else is in place, and as settings we need to take responsibility for our impact. What are we co-creating in our space? If we're expecting a PDA to mask and fawn and cope a lot, there's going to be fallout. What are we sending home? We need to believe what parents tell us. So we'll often see a situation where parents say, my child is not doing okay, and the setting will go, well, you're obviously just not as good at accommodating them as we are. Whereas meantime, we're basically sending home this time bomb that's holding itself in until it gets into the car or into the house, into the safe space, because our safe space is not safe. And there it's important to realize that even places that have worked very hard to be welcoming might still yet feel unsafe. Our goodwill is not enough on its own, but our patience and determination will reap rewards. And so please support yourself using our Shift community. Please stay in the support groups, join the support groups, come to the other calls that are going to happen, and let's make this real. And with that, I am going to end the input, and we are going to go to questions. So yeah, this is your chance to ask questions. The recording is still running. Only your voice will be recorded, but you can just be mindful of what you choose to share, and if you want me to pause the recording, I can very easily do that. You can ask me either with your voice, or you can type into the message section of the meeting, which you can see on the right hand side there. So yeah, the floor is now open. If I haven't numbed everybody's minds beyond being able to respond with that enormous information dump rant. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Yana. I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I think my mind may be so numbed that I might not be able to express my question clearly in a good way. So I'm wondering about that situation when the child comes home. And, obviously this is a whole other topic. So I guess my question is, as somebody who supports families, what might some of my learning avenues be that for myself and to share with these families for how to help the PDA at home when that explosiveness comes out, perhaps as a result of having masked all day, and particularly when it comes to younger siblings, when there isn't necessarily always a choice to have somebody moved out of the situation, or what are some of your, I guess, initial thoughts on that, particularly for further learning at this point?
Okay. So you've asked a kind of a fairly wide question there. Um, are we asking about how to keep the siblings safe, or are we asking how to prevent the meltdowns, or how to manage when there is a meltdown happening?
Well, the family I'm particularly thinking of right now, it would be all of the above,
Okay.
which I fully recognize that this is, not a question that you can give an answer to in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
context. But I wonder whether you do have any avenues to
I
to
think it
suggest.
I think it fits fine because it's analogous to, and maybe parallel to what can happen in a setting as well, with siblings or with other kids. So obviously you want to keep everyone safe. Everyone includes the PDA. Restraint is not a great option. It's not safe for anybody. So it should only be used in the most absolutely nothing else is possible situation, where your PDA might fall through glass or into a fire, or somebody might get seriously hurt. Ideally, we want to not be in the circumstance, which is also where support and accommodation comes in, that we don't want things to get to that point, but especially while people are still learning, it's possible. Or, when certain things happen, it happens. Um, Again, you don't want to try and move the PDA if you don't have to. You want to rather move the other people. They're a lot more movable. Um, and you want to try and do it in a way that communicates to everybody that this is just how it is, right? It's not blame, it's not shame, it's not, um, yeah, it's not that anybody's bad. It's like, it's this is where I start using the analogy of vomiting, right, for a meltdown. Because that's the only time that your PDA is going to be violent. They're not violent people. They're going to be violent because they've been triggered into a seizure type state of fight on the fight, flight, freeze spectrum. So it's like a seizure, or like anxiety vomiting, for example. So you would want to move everybody out of the way of being hit by that, right? And if there's more than one person available to facilitate and support everybody, then you'd want to split those resources. So you'd want somebody to take the others out of reach, and you'd want somebody to stay with the PDA, not too close, not crowding them, not trying to help them and get in their space, but just letting them know I'm nearby when you want me, and just radiating positive, unconditional, positive regard. Um, you can not make eye contact, usually would be good, but just be calm, be there, think happy thoughts, and appreciate that everybody's alive and well, and focus on the positive, and just radiate that, and be patient and wait. Would be a very good approach. Unfortunately, when somebody goes into emergency mode, it's very easy for everybody else to be triggered into emergency mode. And when we are triggered into emergency mode, we go vertical, we go control, we go win-lose, we go fight, we go, and then we try to stop the situation happening, which puts us more into emergency mode. And that's where the enormous lesson for PDA is really very zen. It's very much about being able to not buy into that story and be able to stay with all is well and will be well, and this too shall pass, which is where it really does actually become extremely powerful, to learn how to summon that space at will. And PDAs are fantastic at helping us do that, because we get such beautiful feedback when we haven't quite got it and when we have got it. Obviously there's also needed time for stress hormones to settle, but yeah, you see a completely different person and set of circumstances when you master that. Does that help at all, Stephanie?
It does. Thank you very much. I just have this vision of somebody sitting there radiating positivity and zen calm, that this will pass. And you know, and I think, sorry, I'm sitting outside. There's a plane going overhead. I think for a parent to know that, you know, they can focus really hard and do that for their child without doing something to their child in that moment.
That's beautiful. What you're saying.
It's huge, because, you know, the last thing we want to be as parents is helpless. So knowing that we can do that, but it's within us and it's just radiating outwards is a beautiful way of thinking about it. So thank you.
Yeah. And, you know, I have shared with a number of PDA parents who've shared with me that we have this shared experience that we start out feeling, wow, we can do this for our child, and that's empowering because we're not helpless, that we can do this for our child, and that's great, and we see these results and we realize that it's a blessing that we've given them. And then we get to this space of starting to feel like, who did this for who? Because it kind of becomes like that Zen master situation, right? Where it's like, wow, you're really helping me learn how to do this, and I'm feeling the benefits quite beyond our relationship, that I'm learning to do this. And I don't think I would have learned to do this as thoroughly as this, as quickly as this, in any other way, without going and becoming a monk, which I don't really want to do. So yeah, it's kind of like that thing of, you know, when love flows through us, it flows through us, and we reap the benefits of it flowing through us just as much as the husky that we're hugging in the picture there with the little kid, right? Everybody gets the benefit of the love. More questions?
Hi, Anna. Not so much a question, but more for any SDE facilities or people who are wanting to bring PDAs into their space. I just kind of wanted to, from a parent's perspective, going through this process with your facility and going through, having been through so many situations that you described of people saying, yes, we can support PDA, and then it goes bad because, you know, they don't have the correct provisions in place and it is a perceived failure for the child. I just wanted to kind of reaffirm and say that what you've said in this talk has been, it's so wonderful for me to hear, and I'm hoping it gets out to so many of those facilities, because I think you've explained so many parents of PDA as their whole experience, and it just felt like I was listening to my life and as a parent. And I think it's just great for them to know that the information that you've got, it really truly does work. And yeah, if it's followed, it's beautiful for the child. And just for those facilities to maybe know that just if you give the PDA the chance, you know, it takes time, as you know, and they will then be able to come to that place of calm and be who they are with all those supports in place. But I think I'm so grateful for the talk and the information that you've given.
Great, thank you. Yeah,
no problem.
There's so much benefit for everybody, but I mean, I think it's like anything else, you know. It's like we need to actually do it in order to. I remember the one. In fact, it was interesting. It was a PDA dad who had on his profile the little quote, don't complain to me about all the results you didn't get with all the work you didn't do, right? I think it's just so easy to blame the PDA or blame the parents instead of just doing the work. And it's so valuable, such valuable work to do. More questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo what Leslie said, and I really also could relate so much to what you were saying, and I really liked the moral part that you brought in, because I think all of us with children with PDA have experienced that judgment, and it had never been put to me in that way, and I really liked that. And then what I wanted to say was about sharing your resources.
Yeah.
Can we send this video out, or tell people to join the server? Like, on what can we send and what shouldn't we send?
Right.
Basically.
I'm thinking about that. I want this video to go everywhere. But I also really want people to join the server, because, as I said, this video is not enough.
No, of course.
So I've considered whether I'm going to send the whole video out there, or whether I'm going to send half the video and you can get the other half when you come into the server. Because again, this is how I earn my money, and I never turn anybody away if they are dealing with PDA and they can't pay. I'll just put you in the server. Because it is a social justice issue for me. So from that perspective, I am seriously considering only sending half the video and come and get the other half, because then you'll already have gone through the inconvenience of getting into the Discord and figuring out where to go, and now you're here, so why leave? So now you might as well stay for the next call and stay for the support group and get onto the forum and read what people have said, because I think that for both SDE and for PDA, it's not an instant download of information, then you've had the aha, then you do the thing. It's always another layer and another level that you can achieve, and having the support of other people who are going through the same stuff is huge, absolutely huge. And being able to see the things that are in common and other people's ideas, and the bigger the community grows in the server of people who are PDA literate, the stronger that support's going to be. So the more PDA parents there are, for example, the more chances you'll have of finding somebody else who's been through the exact same thing that you're struggling with, that maybe I can't advise you on. But I mean, I think there's already like 18 PDA parents in this group, and a number of PDA literate facilitators. If the more that we can grow that, the better.
Yeah, they just need to get enough of a bite size to get them to see that you get it and that this is the place to be. And for those schools that claim to be PDA aware and then place the demands and the expectations and aren't, it would be so nice if they could learn as well. If more of them, then we wouldn't have so much disappointment and kids feeling like they failed yet again. When the facilities actually don't know PDA and they think they do.
So this is where, on the other hand, I start feeling like I should send out this whole call because we have to discuss these issues, also need to be heard maybe for people to come in. So I think one of the issues as well is, self-directed education is half of the answer for that, because it's very, very difficult if you still believe that you have to get this curriculum into this child somehow or you'll have failed. Then how do you do that without a demand, right? How? There's no way. You can't. So that's the thing, is that there's a couple of faulty perspectives that all need to collapse together. Like the moral interpretation of the PDA disability needs to collapse. The illusion of the need for progression through grades with a curriculum needs to collapse. the sort of illusion of the illusion of kind of linear progress, sort of that kind of steady rise line that people believe in. You know, I kind of really looked at it funny when I was doing the course with Laura Kirby, when she was saying, PDA learning kind of seems to regress and then progress and then regress. And I was like, hang on, there's a whole lot more going on there that the mainstream's just not going to understand, because all kids learn like that to some extent when it's natural. It's just PDA is maskless. And of course part of it is like you've mastered the thing and now there's a demand to perform the thing, so now you can't do the thing because now it's got a demand on it as well. But I think for me, you know, the SDE is such brilliant news even for settings that are not SDE, right, and are not going to become SDE, that it's safe to make an exception for the PDA to do SDE. Whether they'll manage it to do it in that setting is the question, because all the other kids have got the demand, and then that places a social, cultural level demand on the PDA too. But it's safe. It's safe to let kids neglect their education for a number of years. There's not going to be any fallout. They can catch up. That's the beautiful experience that SDE has to offer, the hope that we have to offer. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if this is also maybe part of that moral thing, because I agree with Belinda. I loved how you put that across. And I think one of the things that I've also noticed, and I've heard it from other parents as well, is that it's always in a lot of these settings, sort of mainstream and other environments, it always seems to be the expectation from the other children and those children's parents that the PDA has to change to fit, or the neurodivergent must change to fit. And a lot of the neurotypical, you know, they are not given the opportunity to understand that child.
Yeah.
So it's almost like even the neurotypicals and a lot of these other facilities need to understand that it's a compromise on both sides. And I think as a parent of a neurodivergent child, you almost get so tired of their expectation that you must help your child change to fit into this world.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what's so lovely about SDE and the community. It's that they all work together.
Yeah.
So it's that compromise, and it's wonderful for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where we come back to that concept of privilege, right? In that privilege is blind. It's like, if I've never had to deal with a problem, I don't understand the problem. The problem is not real for me. So how am I supposed to accept that the problem is real for somebody else? It's difficult when you're sitting in a place of privilege to get that perspective and get that shift. But it's so valuable if you get that perspective and that shift. It will help you in the rest of your life. It will make a very big difference to the rest of your life. It is a shift worth getting to understand one's privileged position. It's not a burden to be called upon to recognize your privileged position. I think, unfortunately, at the moment in the world we're living in right now, people are feeling kind of resistant. But I mean, people have always been resistant. It's also comfortable to sit in your privilege. It's comfortable, but it's not that useful, and it's not that growthful, and it's not that valuable, honestly. But you know, everybody loses when the status quo just stays in that boring old place where the haves have and the haven'ts haven't. I mean, I think that's why every single wisdom tradition tries to tackle that and tries to get people being more aware and more mindful and more humble and more self-aware, because life becomes richer when you actually open your perspective and stop just thinking that the obvious is the obvious and you know it all. Yeah. So there's no educational value in letting privilege sit there unquestioning and putting all the demand on the people who already have the bigger burden. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And also challenge toward compromise, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's everyone learning from everyone and taking it up a level in justice, but our
Yes.
frame of reference makes it feel like we're going down a level, like we're compromising. But no, it's actually us getting better understanding of everyone in the room and what their needs are.
That's beautiful. Yes, exactly.
100%.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's also where, if we look at the world we're living in right now and the mess it's in right now, we need ways forward. And I mean, I that's also where I love, I think one of the first videos of Harry Thompson's that I watched, which was one of my aha videos, because Harry's really the person who got me to realize what PDA really is. Because when I went and like read all the official stuff, it didn't gel. Harry, I was like, oh, okay, yes, right. And he said, don't try to change us. I don't know quite how to get these exact words. I'm just paraphrasing. Like, don't try to change us. Don't try and get us to fit in, because we're here to change the way things are. We're here to get things to shift. That's our value. That's the point. So yeah, that's very, very much my experience. We're at this point where including people who've previously been excluded is critical if humanity is going to actually become healthy enough to survive, because excluding and marginalizing and ignoring and just sitting in privilege is exactly what's gotten us to the point where we're not that likely to survive. So yeah.
Yeah, and also that bit about emotional regulation, that it really challenges you to master regulating your own emotions, and everybody needs that. Every single person can benefit from learning to regulate their emotions, and not only their mental health but their physical health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was sort of doing my aware parenting studies, noticing it's like how many parents throw tantrums about kids throwing tantrums. And yeah, that's it. It's like, I mean, the biblical thing would be, you know, to look at the log in your own eye before you look at the speck in the other person.
Yes.
You know, this is again, all the wisdom traditions point us in the same direction. It's like, sort out the one you can reach, which is only here, right? This is the one I can reach. And when I sort this one out, it leaves the other people free to sort themselves out, which is very much the experience with supporting PDA. Right. We do need to start wrapping up, but we can make space for another question to 2 questions if there are questions still, or sharings. Any further questions or sharings, or do we wrap up here?
I'm good.
Okay. Final call. Okay, so there's always going to be more, and also when it's enough, it's enough. Like a PDA needs to be free to go home in the middle of the day. Like an SDE kid needs to be free to walk out of the middle of the class they've signed up for. Enough is enough. Any last closing comments? Then let's all say goodbye. Been lovely sharing with you, and I look forward to being with you again.
Thank you so much, Jana.
Okay.
Thanks, Jana. It was awesome.
Bye.
It was great.
Bye.
Bye.